I stepped out onto my veranda, instantly hit by the crisp Arctic air of a Tromsø winter. The sun peeked through puffy clouds, casting a warm glow over me as I breathed in the salty scent of the sea. It was a familiar morning scene since I moved here, but today it felt different. Today, I felt truly free for the first time in a long time. As I sipped my coffee and looked up at the sky, my eyes followed the white streaks left behind by a Boeing 777 flying from India to New York. The contrails seemed to dissolve my past and all the false teachings that had clouded my mind. They disappeared like mist evaporating over water on early summer mornings. A sense of relief washed over me as I watched them fade into the distance. As I stood there, watching the planes fly across the sky, a realization dawned on me. One of the false teachings I used to believe in, the infallibility of Paul the Apostle, suddenly became clear to me. I was taught that his words were divinely inspired and replaced the outdated teachings of the Old Testament. But now, as I pored over his letters with a critical eye, doubts and questions flooded my mind like an overwhelming tidal wave. How could I continue to blindly accept his every word as infallible when his own letters contradicted each other on crucial topics? As I delved into church history, I discovered something interesting about Paul's letters. They were not originally intended to be considered as inspired scripture. Rather, they were personal teachings and instructions to specific congregations on how to live out their faith as followers of Jesus. These letters addressed different problems and questions faced by each congregation, resulting in contradictions and confusion in his teachings on the role of women as priests. On one hand, he demanded their silence and prohibited them from teaching. Yet in another instance, he acknowledged that women could serve as apostles. This contradiction makes more sense when considering the context in which Paul wrote these letters. Not as universal commands, but as specific instructions for individual communities. The 777 plane bound for New York slowly disappeared from view, leaving behind only its white streak marking the cold Tromsø sky. As I watched it go, my faith in Paul the Apostle as infallible began to waver. My thoughts turned to a question that had been nagging at me. What does the Bible really say about women as priests? I reached for my Hebrew-Greek Bible and found the passage where Paul instructs women to be silent and not teach. But as I read it in its original language, it became clear that this was directed towards one specific woman in Corinth, not all women everywhere. Paul's words seem to contradict each other. On one hand, he says he only wants to focus on Christ crucified. But on the other hand, he also talks about keeping the Torah and seeing it as a blessing. As I dug deeper into the original Hebrew and Greek texts, I discovered that Paul was referring to the curse of disobedience when mentioning the curse of the law and how Christ took on that curse for us. So when Paul urges us to remember our freedom from the curse of the law or focuses solely on Christ crucified, he is ultimately reminding us to follow God's laws as laid out in the Torah. The blazing orange sun dipped behind the mountains, casting a cool evening breeze through the open balcony doors of my apartment. I hurried inside and closed the glass doors just as a plane, bound for India from New York, roared by overhead, marking the beginning of a new chapter in my understanding of Paul. As I settled onto the plush couch, I couldn't help but feel a sense of comfort and warmth wash over me, grateful to be back in my cozy home after a long day.